Today we're on Ruth chapter 2. The series is on From Ruin to Redemption, and it's made specifically for the ladies today, for women. Last time it was the men. This series is on women and specifically, but it's for everybody. Today the series is going to this idea of not by chance, okay? I want to give a little overview of what this is about in the Bible, this book. This is the first of two books in the Bible that are named after a woman. Anybody remember the other name? Esther. That's correct. There were two books written about women specifically. It takes place during the time of Judges, and Ruth is a Gentile, Moabite. Judges takes place between when Moses went to the Holy Land and Joshua led him into the Holy Land in the time of Judges, which we did the series on that. Sometime during that era is when this was written and when it took place, and it's a pretty cool book. I've enjoyed it a lot. I've got a map, which is a couple of slides down. There you go. Moab is in orange, okay, and they were from Bethlehem, which means house of bread. It was a bread basket, but there was a famine going on there. And so there was a family that needed to leave where they lived because there wasn't enough to eat. At least that's what they thought. It would turn out to be a big mistake by the dad who did it. And so he took his family, Elimelech took his family to this Moab area, which was not a good place for him to take them. Moab had a lot of issues. They worshiped a god that was not a good thing to worship at all. It included child sacrifice, a very terrible area to live in. He took his family there, and he winds up dying there, okay? The characters in this story, in the next slide, Naomi is one of the main ones. She was the wife of Elimelech, who died soon after, as the story begins. And she was the mother of Mahlon and Chilion, who both died as well. So they take their family into this new land. Her husband dies, and she raises her kids there for about 10 years. They marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, and they're the wives. And then they die. The men die. So all the men die. And so now we have Ruth and Naomi who come back to Bethlehem. Actually, it's the first time for Ruth. And Oprah goes and starts a talk show and does a lot of really cool stuff. So this verse was the highlight of last week. It says, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, this is what Ruth is saying to Naomi. I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. So it's a very poignant story about a woman binding with her mother-in-law, and they become a supportive group. Now, so they go back to Bethlehem, but they're really, really destitute. They're really poor. They don't have hardly anything. But the story changes now. Okay, as we progress today, it is a love story. It is a love story about Ruth and Boaz. This is a rom-com, okay, and it's a really good one. And we need to think about relationships because there's so many things that are changing in our culture today with relationships. I was looking at some of the statistics. Over the last 50 years, marriage rates in the U.S. have dropped by nearly 60%. And if you think of the family as one of the cornerstones of our culture, that's not a good thing. 65% of men under the age of 30 are choosing to be single. Most of them live with their parents and play video games all day. Just kidding. But we've come up with this name, adulting, that we didn't have to have before. Why? Because this failure to launch is going on with some young people. And so this is going on. 77% of millennials prefer to live with their partner before marriage, which statistics did not say that leads to a stronger marriage. And so at the beginning, I want to say, If you do what most people do, you'll get what most people get. And so just because this is the statistics of the culture we live in doesn't mean that you have to copy that. And so we're going to look at this story, this love story in chapter 2, and talk about, well, what can we glean from this? What can we learn from this for today? First off, Ruth 2:1. Now, Naomi, Ruth had come back to Bethlehem. They're really poor. They don't know how they're going to make it. She had a relative on her husband's side. By the way, in their culture, if you married an Israelite, and you wanted to have standing, you really didn't become part of the clan until you had a male child. Just the culture. She did not have, because her male child had died. So she's lost some of that. But on her husband's side, there is someone that she's related to. He was a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. I've never met anybody named Boaz. But he was a man of standing. That does not mean that he had a lot of muscles and wore tight shirts, okay? He was a man of standing. Now, it means that he had some wealth, virtue, good character, social standing. He's the hero of the story. He was a man that had gravitas. Now, if you back that up, not yet, Carl, where I want to prepare you for this. Okay, now, a man of standing. So I was listening to this old sermon by this guy, this old pastor. He was talking about what women should look for when they get married, and she said, you need to find a man of standing, not a man of sitting, okay? And the way he put it, he said, you need to find a Boaz. Now we can go to the next one, Carl. Not a lazy ass, not a broke ass, not a dumb ass. Now, those are with Z's, okay? Don't come back at me. But you need to get what? A Boaz. He was a man of standing. He worked hard. People thought of him as a good man. I was telling this to somebody, and the young lady said, that describes my last 3 boyfriends I had. You don't need that. You need a Boaz. And then it says in verse 2, it says, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go back to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. And Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. I want to talk about this for just a second. Ruth doesn't wait around for somebody to come rescue her. Ruth is a woman who takes initiative. She sees what needs doing, and then she goes and does it. There used to be this movie our kids watched a bunch, series of unfortunate events, and whenever the girl who is kind of the heroine of the what was her name? Violet, when she gets ready to do something, she would tie up her hair and pull it and tie, because that's when she was going to step in. So this is what happened. These two are in trouble. They don't have enough food to survive. They're going to starve to death. So Ruth, she steps up. She says, let me go and do this. She didn't wait around for somebody to come riding in a white horse to rescue her. So if you've got that mindset today, let it go, okay? You need to be a woman of initiative. She steps up. She knew they needed to eat. She shows resourcefulness. And this is not easy for her, because her ethnic status had not changed. She was viewed as a foreigner. And to glean in the field in a foreign land was hard to do, and there are many paths, by the way, women, not many, a few paths that she could have provided for herself. They were not very respectable. She could have begged. That was not very respectable. She could have used prostitution. She didn't have much to work with, but she decides that she's going to go to the fields and work. Okay, now, This is the Israelite form of welfare. And I want to talk about this a little bit. There's a verse in the Bible, or people say there's a verse in the Bible that says, the Lord helps those who help themselves. You ever heard that before? It's not really in the Bible, okay? It's not completely accurate the way things work, but it's not completely inaccurate to the way things work. You know, God expects you to step up and do things, not just to sit back and pray, but to get up and do things. You know, in the Old Testament, they had these fields that everybody, would own, and they were demarcated with boundary stones. And the harvesters at the time, they would plant the crop, and then they go to harvest it. They had a sickle, and they would cut off the stalks, and they would lay down the ears, and then they would take the stalks, and people called gleaners would come through the fields, and they would gather the stalks together and tie them together in a bundle. And you know what you called that? A sheaf. You ever heard that old hymn, bringing in the sheaves? That's what a sheaf is. It's a bundle of grain. And so they had this system for the poor. It comes from Leviticus 19:9. It says this, that text, which is the next one. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time to pick up the grapes that have fallen when you picked them up the first time. Leave them from the poor, for the poor and the foreigner, and I'm the Lord your God. Okay, so this is a story. And so she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Now, there's a couple of lessons here. I got to thinking about this. This system that they have is actually a good system because it doesn't say the person that owns the land is supposed to go out and pick up all the gleanings, package it up, carry it to the person's home, and gives it to them. It requires what? Work. And the person that's going to benefit has to go out and work. You just don't get it. It's just not given to you. It's available. You couldn't become rich from it. You couldn't be rich from getting the leftovers like that. But you could survive. And it was a pretty good system, okay? And so I think that's good for us to learn today and think about how we want to live. Now, the job itself was a job that not a lot of people would want to do because it was a little bit embarrassing to go out and start gleaning when you didn't plant it, and everybody knows you didn't plant it. And but when you're in a certain situation, her husband died, the boys died. There's no humiliation for earning a day's pay for a day's work. There is no job. I don't care if it's minimum wage. If you're working and doing something to better yourself, God wants to bless you through that. Okay? And every job is honorable. It doesn't matter if you're working a job, I don't know where it is, but if you're working it, you're doing something to get out of that situation, that's a good thing. And so she and by the way, in the text a minute ago, Naomi called her daughter. She doesn't call her daughter-in-law anymore. And Naomi is not doing well. She's kind of still depressed. Remember, she said, call me bitter, because she's lost so much. So Ruth is stepping up. She knows she needs to do something. Now, I wonder why Naomi didn't say, well, we've got some land. Elimelech has got some land. I think she was still too depressed. I don't think she could get out of that very easily. And so Ruth went out on her own. There were these fields outside of Bethlehem, and you had no idea what field you were going to if you were new. And the next verse says, as it turned out, she was working in a field that belonged to who? Boaz, a man of standing, who was from the clan of Elimelech, her father-in-law that died. Now, as it turned out, there's another translation that says, as it happened, or just so happened. A lot of people believe in something called luck, which is a random occurrence of chance. It's prevalent in a lot of cultures. So, I've just got good luck. I got good luck. Let me talk to you something about that's really true. It's called the providence of God. It's when God uses natural circumstances to bring about his supernatural plans. That happens today all the time. You think, oh, it's good luck. Oh, yeah, good luck. Listen, providence is working in your life and my life. You might not always be aware of it, but here is an example to me of where providence is actually working in such a positive way. Of all the fields that she could have gone to, the first field she goes to is Boaz's field. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. That's saying you think everything is by chance, but God is in control. God is. God is in control, and he works through our lives in ways you're not even aware. Verse 4, it goes on. Just then, guess who shows up? Boaz, the man. In his Range Rover, arrived from Bethlehem. And notice what he greets the guys who are working for him with. The Lord be with you. And then he says, the Lord bless you. Have you ever had a boss that did that in the morning? Good morning, the Lord bless you. But he did. And Boaz asks the overseer, of his harvesters, who were male and female, who does that young woman belong to? First time he sees her. Some of y'all remember the first time you saw your husband or wife? You know, a lot of y'all been married a while. Anybody been married longer than 40 years? And if your husband died when you were married longer than 40 years, raise your hand too. What about longer than 50 years? In our culture today, less than 5% of the people have been married longer than 50 years. It takes a lot, you know. And so this is the first time Boaz sees this woman. And the overseer replied. Now, by the way, this is something that I discovered as I'd never read this before as I was reading some commentaries about this. Some of the commentaries say the overseer really didn't care for Ruth too much. And he says, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab, doesn't use her name. You know, she's a Moabite with Naomi. And then he says that she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. Now, that would have been an unusual ask. Because the way the law said is you gleaned on the outside of the fields. You didn't go right in the sheaves behind the harvesters. That would be prime location. No, you did it on the outside. But he says that she asked this. Doesn't say that earlier, by the way. And he says, she came into the field and has remained here from morning till now. Now, in the original Hebrew, it says has been standing here from morning till now, for a short rest in the shelter. Now, the image, which I'd never gotten before, that could have happened this way, that she got there, the overseer didn't like her, didn't even let her start working, made her stand there while everybody else is working. And so here comes Boaz, and he sees her standing there, everybody else doing it, so he says, who is she? Well, something hits him, okay? It hits him. I don't know if the way she looked. I don't know if what it might be. You know what I thought might be part of it, though? If you think about who Boaz is, do you know it might have been his grandmama. It definitely wasn't his mama. In the Bible, they do this thing where they telescope your lineage. For instance, sometimes it says Jesus was the son of David, the son of Abraham. It skips over all the rest. Well, in the lineage of Jesus, it says that Boaz was the son of guess who? Rahab. And so if Rahab was his mom or grandma or even a more distant relative, but if he knew her and thought, well, that's where I come from. Maybe he had a heart for people who were outsiders, who we looked on as second class. And so he goes to her, okay? And in verse 8, he says, Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter. Now listen to me. Now he didn't mean you're my daughter. That was a term of endearment. I don't want you to go and glean in any other field. And don't go away from here. You stay right here with the women who work for me. I want you to watch the field where the men are harvesting. I want you to follow along after the women, not on the edges. I've told the men, do not lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. Now, this is a very unusual in many ways. First off, in that culture, women got the water and would have gone back to Bethlehem, to the well in Bethlehem, and brought the water. Second, a Moabite, a foreigner, would have gotten the water. And here he says, no, you can just drink the water here that the men have gotten. So that's verse 2:9, Carl. And then this kindness, though, I want to focus just a minute on kindness and how important it is. We live in a culture where I think sometimes we've forgotten kindness. Kindness is so important. In Proverbs 19:17, it says, whoever is kind to the poor and lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Okay? This idea of giving, that it's important for us to give. I'm going to come back to that. And it goes on. It says, at this she bowed down her face to the ground, and she asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, which is next one, Carl, that you notice me a foreigner? And she calls herself a foreigner. And Boaz replied, I've told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law. I've heard this story from other people in town since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with a people that you don't even know before. I know your backstory. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord and the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And the idea of under the wings, like an image of a mother bird protecting her chicks. This idea that men, I think, should take care of women, by the way, has gone to the wayside. I heard a pastor friend of mine talking, and he said, when I was growing up, he said, our high school took a field trip to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., and he said we were looking at these art galleries, which is kind of boring for him. But he said there was a bench there, and you could sit down. We've been walking all day, and the bench, there was a lot of people sitting there. And he said, I remember as a kid, I got up so that my teacher, who was a lady, could, because she was standing. And his teacher said to him, she said, Mr. Hamrick, sit down. Chivalry is dead. And he got to thinking, what is she teaching that boy? We have gender identity confusion. The fact is, the way men treat other men is not always nice. Sometimes it's not so nice. I mean, we have digestive problems and we don't care. We make fun of each other and we enjoy making fun of each other most of the time. This guy was having too much fun with his wife, kind of poking fun, and he crossed the line, and she turned to him and she said, I'm not one of your guy friends, okay? You treat with respect and kindness. Here it says, this is what Boaz did with her, and he took care of her. And she responded, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. So she didn't have a lot. I mean, if she had a social media page for a dating app somewhere, it wouldn't look good. Ruth's profile would have looked something like this, which is the next slide. She was a Moabite, not a good thing. She worshiped Chemosh, that's her people, even though she kind of renounced that. She was widowed, she'd been married before, and she had a bitter old mother-in-law. That wouldn't have looked good. But what he saw in Ruth was this. He saw that she was faithful to God. She was loyal to her family. She's a hard worker. She honors God morally. He saw those qualities. And what qualities that Ruth saw in Boaz? He honors her, which is the next one. He protects her. He provides for her. And he prays for her. Those are pretty important things, aren't they? I got looking at some survey. What qualities do women look for in men today? I watched this silly movie the other day, and in the movie there's these people in high school, and this guy was kind of a overweight kid, and then he wound up being Rock Johnson, The Rock, I forgot his name anyway. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. And the girls loved him. Listen, that's not really true. Do you know what they did a survey, okay, of 64,000 women in 180 countries. It was done by a university in Germany. It polled 180 countries, 64,000 women, and asked, what's the number one quality that you're attracted to in a man? It wasn't muscles. Guess what it was? Well, the number one, 90%, kindness. Cross countries, what they look for in a man. The second thing was a supportiveness, 86%. Could it include financial supportiveness? I'm not sure. The third one is intelligence, 72%, which puts a lot of us guys out right there, I tell you. And the fourth one was confidence. So those are the things. You know, physical attractiveness did not meet the top four. Okay, so 44% of women say they'd rather have an average body type than a muscular guy, which only 2.5% of women said they like very muscular types. Okay, so that's better for some of us. But it's about being kind and taking care of people. It's what the Bible teaches as well as the way people feel today. So they met each other. It's a good first meeting. Verse 14, it says, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, this is their lunchtime, which is the next verse, Carl, thank you. Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. You don't usually do that with people, okay, that work for you. But he's having lunch with his workers, and he asked her to come over and dip. There was actually some kind of dip they had made out of fermented or old wine anyway. It was some kind of made it taste better. And she sat down with the harvesters, and he offered, that's next verse, he offered her some roasted grain, which is not just, people would eat back then, eat it raw or roasted. Roasted was like the really nice stuff. And then she ate all she wanted, and she had some left over. And then she got up to glean, and Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves. Don't reprimand her. So he gives her special treatment. The more he looks at her. I got to thinking, the first time he looked at her, I wonder what she looked like. No makeup, living in a tough situation, hot, sweaty. Is that way you wouldn't want to look if you were going to meet somebody who's going to marry you? Listen, if a woman is pretty without makeup, she's really pretty. And So anyway, he likes her a lot, and he even says, he said, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them here to pick up, and don't rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned in the field, worked hard until evening, and then she threshed the barley she had gathered. She hit it with a stick, and it amounted about an ephah. Now, an ephah is a measure of dry weight, okay? It is about it looks like between 40 and 50 pounds. That's pretty heavy. So she must have put it in some kind of cloth sack and carried it over her shoulder. Imagine carrying, how much does a gallon of milk weigh? About 10 pounds, so 5 gallons of milk. Okay, a pack of shingles. Okay, that's a real woman. We shingled our house one time, and they were heavy, carrying them up to the roof. A pack of shingles. That's what it felt like to carry that home. And she carried it back to town. Her mother-in-law saw how much she'd gathered, and her mother-in-law comes out of her depression some. Says, Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. So not only did she give her these 50-pound sack of grain, but she brought her leftovers from lunch. Do you like leftovers? Leftovers is good. And she brought that roasted grain. And her mother-in-law was eating that grain, and they were having a good time. And her mother-in-law asked her, which is next one there, where did you glean today? Where did you work? She didn't even know. And blessed be the man who took notice of you. She doesn't know who it was. And Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one whose place she had been working. And the name of the man I work with today, Boaz. So her mother-in-law says, the Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. That means she knows that he's a close relative. That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian or kinsman redeemer. In Hebrew, it's called a goel. And we're going to talk about that more as we go through this story. But he is like a provider. And then Ruth, the Moabite, said, he's even said to me, stay with my workers until they finished harvesting all of my grain. So not only I got to work today in the field, not even today, I get tomorrow, it's 7 weeks is a harvest. I get to work for the next 7 weeks. By the way, she got enough grain the first day to feed them for 7 days. And now she says, I can do it the rest of the season. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. And she lived with her mother-in-law. You know, this is a beautiful story of redemption. Boaz and Ruth are included in Matthew's chapter in the New Testament in the genealogical line that leads to Jesus. And this woman who is on the outskirts, God's providence brought her what she needed to have as, to support this new family and to be with her and just come alongside. Now, I don't know where you are today. You might have come today thinking, boy, I got a lot of troubles. I don't know how I'm going to make it. Do you think Jesus knows about those troubles? He does. He does. And he can work through all things and make all things good to those who love Christ. And so I pray to you that you would have the same faith that Ruth had, assertive faith, not a faith that sits around and waits for somebody on a white horse to show up. But God can work. He can work through you working along with him and empowering you to be who he wants you to be.